Have you ever found yourself standing at a crossroads, faced with a moral dilemma that tears at the very fabric of your being? Perhaps you've wondered what makes an action truly good, or questioned whether our intentions matter more than the consequences of our deeds. These questions have haunted humanity since time immemorial, yet few have provided answers as profound and enduring as those offered by Immanuel Kant, the philosopher from Königsberg, whose ideas continue to challenge and transform our understanding of morality, knowledge, and human existence itself. Many of us walk through life with an intuitive sense of right and wrong, yet struggle to articulate the foundations upon which our moral judgments rest. We feel the weight of ethical questions pressing upon us, but lack the conceptual framework to address them with clarity and conviction. Kant's philosophy, though often perceived as austere and inaccessible, offers precisely this framework, a way of understanding ourselves and our place in the moral universe that can illuminate even the darkest corners of ethical uncertainty. By the end of our journey today, you will not only grasp the fundamental principles of Kant's thought, but also discover how these principles can reshape your perspective on everyday decisions, relationships, and your very understanding of what it means to be human. The insights we'll explore together won't simply expand your philosophical vocabulary. They will transform how you navigate the moral complexity of existence and empower you to think with greater depth and authenticity. Understanding Kant's approach to ethics and knowledge isn't merely an academic exercise. It's an opportunity to awaken a more reflective, autonomous way of being in the world, one that honors both reason and humanity. So let us embark together on this philosophical expedition, not as distant observers of abstract ideas, but as fellow travelers seeking wisdom that speaks directly to the human condition. Kant's philosophical revolution begins with a fundamental shift in how we understand knowledge itself. For centuries, philosophers had been divided between rationalists, who believed true knowledge came from pure reason, and empiricists who insisted all knowledge derived from sensory experience. Kant transcended this divide with a startling insight. Our minds don't simply receive information passively, but actively structure our experience through innate categories and forms. Imagine your mind as not merely a mirror reflecting reality, but more like a sophisticated camera with built-in filters and settings that determine how the world appears to you. Time and space aren't features of reality independent of us. They are the fundamental ways our minds organize sensation. Causality isn't something we observe directly in the world, but rather a concept our minds impose to make sense of what we experience. This means we never perceive things as they are in themselves, what Kant calls noumena, but only as they appear to us through the lens of our cognitive faculties, the phenomena. This may seem abstract, but consider how profoundly it reshapes our understanding of reality. That feeling of certainty you have about the objective world around you? Kant suggests it says more about how your mind works than about reality itself. The universe, as you experience it, is partly your own creation, shaped by the very structure of your consciousness. And yet, Kant wasn't suggesting that reality is merely subjective, or that truth is whatever we make it. Instead, he proposed that human knowledge operates within certain boundaries. We can know with certainty the world as it appears to us, structured by our forms of intuition and categories of understanding, but we cannot transcend these limits to grasp ultimate reality directly. This humbling realization sets the stage for Kant's equally revolutionary approach to morality, which begins not with consequences or divine commands, but with human reason itself. I want to pause here and ask you directly, how many times have you felt lost trying to connect the abstract concepts of Kant's epistemology with your own daily experience? That feeling that there's something profound to be understood about the limits of human knowledge, yet somehow it remains just beyond your grasp. You are not alone. Many of us carry this quiet restlessness, this desire to truly comprehend the fundamental questions that Kant posed about how we know what we know. I'd like you to share your experience in the comments. It could be something as simple as, "My greatest difficulty with understanding Kant's theory of knowledge is si." Your comment not only helps me create content more directly addressing your actual needs, but also creates a community where others, who might be facing the same obstacles as you, can feel understood and less alone in their philosophical journey. It's through this sincere exchange that we grow together. So please, pause the video for a moment and share your experience. Your voice matters more than you might imagine. At the heart of Kant's moral philosophy lies one of the most powerful ideas in ethical thought, the categorical imperative. Unlike hypothetical imperatives that command conditionally, "If you want X, then do Y," categorical imperatives command unconditionally. They apply to all rational beings, regardless of their particular desires or circumstances. Kant formulated this principle in several ways. But perhaps the most famous is this: act only according to that maxim by which you can, at the same time, will that it should become a universal law. Imagine a world where everyone followed the same principle that guides your action. Would such a world be coherent, or would it collapse into contradiction? If you're considering telling a lie for convenience, ask yourself, what if everyone lied whenever it benefited them? The practice of promising itself would become meaningless. The moral test isn't whether your action produces good outcomes, but whether the principle behind it could function as a universal law for all rational beings. This marks a radical departure from consequentialist ethics, which judges actions by their results. For Kant, the moral worth of an action lies not in its consequences, but in the intention behind it, specifically in acting from duty rather than inclination. Consider two shopkeepers who both give customers correct change. The first does so only because honesty is good for business. The second does so because it's the right thing to do, even when no one would notice a discrepancy. Though their actions appear identical, Kant would say only the second shopkeeper acts with true moral worth, because only they act from duty rather than self-interest. This may seem counterintuitive. Surely what matters is that people do the right thing, regardless of their motivations. But Kant recognized something profound. A world where people act rightly only when it serves their purposes is fundamentally different from a world where people recognize moral duties that transcend self-interest. The first remains hostage to fortune and circumstance. The second achieves a kind of freedom through rational self-governance. This brings us to another formulation of the categorical imperative, one that speaks directly to human dignity. Act so that you treat humanity, whether in your own person or that of another, always as an end and never merely as a means. Every rational being has inherent value that demands respect. To manipulate others for your benefit to use them merely as tools for your purposes without regard for their own autonomy, violates this fundamental principle. Consider how this reshapes our understanding of human relationships. That colleague you're tempted to flatter just to secure a promotion, that friend whose emotional support you seek without genuine reciprocity, that stranger whose humanity gets lost behind their function as a service provider. Kant's principle cuts through these instrumental calculations and reminds us that each person deserves respect, not for what they can do for us, but for who they are as autonomous moral agents. This principle extends even to how we treat ourselves. Self-destructive behaviors, whether physical or psychological, fail to honor the humanity within us. Kant's ethics thus places human dignity at the center of moral consideration in a way that transcends cultural boundaries and speaks to our deepest intuitions about human worth. But this moral vision isn't merely about respecting existing autonomy. It's about creating conditions where autonomy can flourish. Kant envisioned a kingdom of ends, where each rational being is both sovereign and subject, recognizing moral laws they give to themselves. This isn't a physical place, but a moral ideal. A community of rational beings who respect each other's dignity and freedom while acknowledging the moral law that binds them all. Such a vision may seem utopian, yet it continues to inspire ethical thought and political action, challenging us to create institutions and relationships that honor human autonomy rather than undermine it. The implications of Kant's moral philosophy extend far beyond individual ethics into political thought and our understanding of human progress. For Kant, political arrangements should be judged by how well they respect human freedom and dignity. A just society isn't merely one that produces the greatest happiness, but one that secures conditions under which each person can exercise their autonomy. This led Kant to advocate for republican forms of government based on principles of freedom, equality, and independence of citizens. He envisioned a world moving gradually toward perpetual peace through federations of free states, international law, and universal hospitality, ideas that anticipate modern institutions like the United Nations and principles of international human rights. Yet Kant was no naive optimist. He recognized the crooked timber of humanity, from which no straight thing can be made. Human beings, in his view, possess a radical evil, a tendency to subordinate moral principles to self-interest when the two conflict. Nevertheless, he maintained hope in humanity's moral progress, seeing history as a slow, uneven march toward greater freedom and enlightenment. For Kant, enlightenment means emergence from self-imposed immaturity, the courage to use one's own understanding without guidance from another. Sapere aude, he proclaimed, dare to know, have the courage to use your own reason. This call to intellectual autonomy resonates powerfully in our age of information bubbles, propaganda, and manufactured consent. Kant challenges us not only to think for ourselves, but to create social conditions where others can do the same, to contribute to a public sphere where reason can be exercised freely and openly. Perhaps nowhere are the tensions in Kant's thought more evident than in his understanding of freedom. On one hand, his theoretical philosophy suggests that the natural world operates according to strict causal laws. Every event is determined by prior causes stretching back indefinitely. If human beings were merely natural phenomena, our actions, too, would be fully determined by prior causes, leaving no room for genuine freedom or moral responsibility. Yet Kant's moral philosophy presupposes precisely this freedom. We can only be morally responsible if we could have acted otherwise. Kant's solution to this apparent contradiction lies in his distinction between phenomena and noumena. As phenomenal beings in the natural world, our actions are indeed causally determined. But as noumenal beings, things in themselves, we possess a transcendental freedom that exists outside the causal order of nature. This isn't a supernatural escape hatch from natural laws, but rather a recognition that moral agency operates in a dimension that natural science cannot fully capture. When we deliberate morally, we necessarily assume our freedom, even if we cannot theoretically prove it. This complex understanding of freedom illuminates our everyday experience of moral choice. That feeling of standing at a crossroads, weighing different possible actions, experiencing the burden and dignity of choice. These aren't illusions for Kant, but glimpses of our noumenal nature breaking through into phenomenal consciousness. We experience ourselves simultaneously as determined natural beings and as free moral agents. This duality isn't a contradiction to be resolved, but the fundamental condition of human existence. We inhabit the intersection of necessity and freedom, causality and morality, nature and reason. This insight helps us understand why moral questions feel so different from scientific ones. Why, "What ought I to do?" cannot be answered in the same way as "What will happen if?" Kant's approach to religion further illuminates his understanding of human moral development. Though often portrayed as dry and abstract, his moral philosophy contains profound spiritual dimensions. For Kant, religion at its best isn't about securing divine favor or supernatural intervention, but about symbolically representing moral truths that reason itself discloses. God, freedom, and immortality, the three great ideas of pure reason, cannot be proven theoretically. But they function as necessary postulates of practical reason. We must act as if they were true to make sense of moral experience. Without God, there would be no perfect alignment of virtue and happiness. Without freedom, moral responsibility would be meaningless. Without immortality, the project of moral perfection would remain perpetually incomplete. These aren't arbitrary assumptions, but the conditions that make moral striving intelligible. Kant thus reinterprets religious concepts in moral terms. Original sin becomes the radical evil in human nature, our tendency to make exceptions for ourselves when moral principles become inconvenient. Salvation isn't supernatural rescue, but the gradual triumph of the moral law in our character. Divine grace symbolizes the mysterious capacity for moral transformation that can't be reduced to our own efforts. Heaven represents not a supernatural reward, but the idea of a moral world where virtue and happiness perfectly align. This moral reinterpretation of religion doesn't empty it of meaning, but reveals its deeper significance. Religion, properly understood, supports and symbolizes our moral development without replacing rational autonomy with blind obedience. It offers a language and framework for understanding our moral struggles and aspirations in ways that pure philosophical concepts sometimes cannot. This approach allows us to appreciate religious traditions without surrendering critical reason, to find moral wisdom in religious teachings while maintaining our intellectual integrity. The relevance of Kant's philosophy extends even to our understanding of beauty and art. While his ethics emphasizes duty and principle, His aesthetics opens up a realm of disinterested pleasure and free play between imagination and understanding. For Kant, aesthetic judgment differs fundamentally from both cognitive judgment, which subsumes particulars under concepts, and moral judgment, which applies principles to actions. When we judge something beautiful, we aren't making a claim about its objective properties or its utility, but expressing a subjective feeling that nevertheless demands universal agreement. This seemingly paradoxical, subjective universality of aesthetic judgment points to something profound about human community. In experiencing beauty, we transcend our private perspectives and enter a space of potential shared feeling. We don't just say, "I find this beautiful," but "this is beautiful," implicitly claiming that others, if properly attentive, should feel as we do. Art thus becomes a unique form of communication that bridges subjectivity and universality, particularity and community. It offers an experience of freedom different from, but complementary to, moral freedom. While moral freedom consists in self-legislation according to rational principles, aesthetic freedom manifests in the harmonious, free play of our faculties, unconstrained by determinate concepts, yet exhibiting a purposiveness without specific purpose. This understanding of art's significance has influenced generations of artists and critics, suggesting that aesthetic experience isn't merely pleasant distraction, but a vital dimension of human flourishing that both complements and balances our moral and intellectual development. It reminds us that being fully human involves not just knowing truth and doing good, but also appreciating beauty in its many forms. As our journey through Kant's philosophy approaches its conclusion, we return to the question that animates all philosophical inquiry. What does it mean to live well as a human being? For Kant, a life well lived emerges at the intersection of three fundamental questions. What can I know? What ought I to do? What may I hope for? The first question acknowledges the boundaries of human understanding. We can know the world as it appears to us, structured by our cognitive faculties, but ultimate reality remains beyond our grasp. This epistemic humility protects us from dogmatism without surrendering to skepticism. The second question directs us toward moral duty, to act according to principles that could become universal laws, and to treat humanity always as an end in itself. This moral vision elevates us above mere self-interest without demanding superhuman sacrifice. The third question opens a space for rational hope, that despite the evident misalignment between virtue and happiness in this world, a moral order ultimately prevails in which the good find fulfillment. This hopeful vision sustains moral striving without requiring naive optimism about immediate results. Together, these three dimensions, knowledge, morality, and hope, outline a comprehensive approach to human existence that addresses both our limitations and our aspirations. They suggest that living well means maintaining a delicate balance, accepting the boundaries of our knowledge while continuing to seek truth, recognizing our moral duties without falling into rigid perfectionism, nurturing hope for moral progress without ignoring the realities of human frailty. This balanced approach offers an alternative to the extremes that often characterize contemporary life. The relativism that abandons the search for truth, the consequentialism that reduces morality to calculations of utility, the cynicism that dismisses all hope for human improvement. Kant's philosophy, properly understood, isn't a system of abstract propositions, but a way of orienting ourselves in the world that honors both our rational nature and our human condition. The journey we've undertaken together through Kant's philosophy reveals a vision of human existence that remains profoundly relevant in our fragmented age. In a world where knowledge is often reduced to information, Kant reminds us that understanding requires active engagement rather than passive reception, that our minds don't merely mirror reality, but help constitute it through innate structures of cognition. In an ethical landscape dominated by calculations of utility and power, he offers a moral vision grounded in human dignity and rational autonomy, one that sees each person as inherently valuable rather than merely useful. In a cultural context oscillating between dogmatic certainty and nihilistic doubt, his philosophy charts a middle path that acknowledges human limitations while affirming the possibility of genuine knowledge, moral truth, and rational faith. As you move forward from this exploration of Kant's ideas, consider how they might transform your approach to everyday decisions and relationships. How might your interactions with others change if you consistently treated them as ends in themselves rather than merely as means to your purposes? How might your relationship with yourself evolve if you honored the humanity in your own person by living according to principles you could will as universal laws? How might your perspective on social and political issues shift if you evaluated them in terms of their compatibility with human dignity and autonomy rather than mere utility or tradition? The power of Kant's philosophy lies not in providing simple answers to complex questions, but in offering a framework for thinking that elevates us above immediate self-interest toward a more universal perspective. One that seeks what is true, right, and humanly fulfilling beyond the confines of personal preference or cultural convention. Though we may never fully realize the ideals Kant articulates, the effort to approximate them ennobles our existence and connects us to a community of rational beings across time and space who share the aspiration to live according to principles worthy of our humanity. If you've ever felt overwhelmed by the complexities of philosophical thought, know that you are not alone on this journey. The path to understanding Kant need not be solitary or confusing. I invite you to subscribe to this channel and become part of a community of people who, like you, seek clarity amid the swirling torrent of fragmented information about philosophy. By subscribing, you'll receive weekly reflections that transform seemingly inaccessible concepts into practical insights for your life. We're not merely studying philosophy, we're learning to think with greater depth, to question with more wisdom, and to live with more purpose. Click the subscription button now, not as an obligation, but as a gift to your own intellectual development. And if this content has brought some clarity to you today, leave your like as a way of saying we're together in this pursuit of true knowledge. Remember, understanding Kant is not just an academic exercise. It's a way of awakening to a more conscious and authentic existence. The philosophical journey we've begun today doesn't end with the conclusion of this video. Kant's ideas continue to resonate across disciplines and cultures precisely because they speak to perennial questions about human knowledge, morality, and meaning. They challenge us to transcend the limitations of our particular perspective while acknowledging the boundaries of human understanding. They invite us to see ourselves simultaneously as natural beings, subject to causal laws, and as moral agents capable of freedom. They encourage us to envision a world where human dignity serves as the foundation for social and political arrangements. Most importantly, they remind us that philosophy isn't a mere intellectual game, but a vital dimension of human flourishing, one that connects our individual lives to universal principles and our present moment to timeless questions. As you continue your own philosophical journey, whether through further exploration of Kant or engagement with other thinkers, maintain the balance of critical analysis and open receptivity that characterizes genuine philosophical inquiry. Question rigorously, but listen attentively. Seek clarity without demanding certainty. Honor tradition while remaining open to innovation. In doing so, you participate not just in an academic discipline, but in humanity's ongoing conversation about how best to understand ourselves and our place in the cosmos. A conversation to which Kant made an indelible contribution and to which you too can add your voice.